area that I'm really interested in is around this space is the SME space, because Emma, a lot of your clients are global and quite big organisations. Like when I was at Ashurst, you're dealing with big organisations. How do we cascade good thinking, purposefulness, responsible business, whatever we've agreed on? How do we cascade that down to SMEs? And I'll give you a for instance. I was talking to the CEO of a groundworks business in the construction space not long ago, and he was telling me that a main contractor had called their main suppliers in and basically mandated significant change in their behaviours, kind of do ESG, as it were. And it was a take it or leave it. Now, arguably, that's not the best practice. You should be working with the supply chain. But even if that's an extreme end, his view was our margins are way for thin. And it's then about how do we invest into paying our people, et cetera, and all the cascading effects. How do we cascade this message down to the SME space to get them on board and to get them embracing it?
I think we come across this quite a lot actually at B People, where we do some work in this space, but I think having more recently got into it, what you actually see is the real pressure to do something different on a small company or a medium-sized company is coming from bigger companies telling them that they have made certain commitments themselves on an ESG front, and that now needs to be cascaded through their supply chain. I was just in with an architect firm recently where I know the founder of it, and I know that they would have had no interest in this, really. And not in a terrible way. I mean, they are very concerned about environmental practices, the buildings they're building now, just because of the legislation. They have to be on top of this. So they're not a bad organisation at all, but they wouldn't have gone any further than the environmental considerations. I rolled in to have a chat with this founder, and the day before, his biggest client had sent him a document saying, here are the ESG commitments we've made to our shareholders. We need all of our suppliers to now start thinking clearly about what their ESG plans are. And he was all ears as we started to talk about how the B Corp framework, for example, could help, which is the sort of the point of this conversation. So I see more pressure coming onto smaller and medium-sized organisations from large organisations insisting upon it than anything that government are trying to promote or whatever. So then you get to the point of saying, OK, well, but is that fair? Because do they have the resources and so on? And I'm not here to sort of shamelessly sort of promote the B Corp movement, but the thing that we always have found fascinating about it is because they are a not-for-profit, and they are very clever and they have a lot of expert people, involved with them. They have developed these tools, which are incredibly sophisticated tools for building very practical ESG plans, which are free, and which, I've now, been talking with various smaller companies about how they might build an ESG plan using that framework. It's incredibly accessible and it's incredibly easy. And I suppose the point as well, it doesn't tell them they have to be perfect. What it's driving at is to take them from a position of unconscious incompetence. It takes them to a position of conscious incompetence to start with. But actually, organisations get a lot of credit for that. And so they should, because there's no perfect organisations at the moment. Everyone is consciously incompetent to a degree. So it promotes that idea first, and of course its objective is to get them to conscious competence. So I think it's good that the pressure's there, and it's good that there's tools available to help organisations very cost-effectively build good plans.
And this is the whole point, isn't it? You've got to share expertise. Some of the problem is that we're just talking to the converted on a regular basis. And we need to go out and share what we did, what worked, what really didn't work, because that's actually the most important thing. We all sit there and go, oh, this is brilliant. And we don't go, we tried this, it was rubbish, really expensive. I think actually there needs to be some honest conversations between organisations and a sharing of knowledge. It comes back to this point about, how we're going to do this together in order to make a difference. And that is a shining example of how you can really make a difference.
And I was just going to make a really quick point that, to your point on kind of cost effectiveness and margins, what I see time and time again, I did a lot of work in the construction industry, so I kind of get that industry, is wastage.
Yes.
So it's, you would make those margins if you were being more efficient with what you're doing. But the amount of time you over-design things, and there's material wastage going on. You walk past a construction site and you see the generator just going 24/7. There is better ways of doing business. So actually, and I know the big companies, the big construction guys are looking at this, but actually you take that all the way down through the construction market, just taking one market, there are so many efficiencies to be made. And each one of those efficiencies is a money saver.
Yeah.
To
Lee, you go.
defend it slightly for the small business, the SME kind of point of view, I think, because a lot of them won't necessarily have the time or the budget to be putting in as much time as a larger kind of corporation would do. So to then have an organisation say, right, here's the brief, or we want you to do a proposal, but you have to meet all these criteria of which you know nothing about, without any support in any way, but potentially kind of the changing the brief. And speaking with a friend who works in kind of built environment, and her very much saying around how when a client she was working with changed the brief, so instead of saying, right, this is the brief, and you have to tick all these ESG boxes, they went, right, this brief will be decided based on this criteria around how much carbon you can save, or this is how we think we'd like to save carbon, or tick these boxes. Can you bring us your suggestions, your solutions to this issue? And that's what we're judging on, rather than what you would normally do, and you just have to tick these boxes that you don't necessarily know a whole lot about as a smaller business. So that would kind of be my one point, is putting more responsibility on the organisation when they're briefing to not just support in achieving those goals, but changing how they brief and how they potentially want to kind of make
innovation to the table.
Exactly.
Or ask them to bring it to the table rather than saying you must do.
Yeah, you might, and then it becomes, like you said, a tick box. Or the other potential where breaking it up, and go back, we mentioned this about kind of supply chain and smaller businesses and breaking up those contracts so that you can go to someone that, a B Corp or an SME who, a social enterprise, whose niche is that, and because they're more local, they are already ticking those boxes, to use an initial example, rather than those that maybe aren't changing and are just going to try and get around it somehow, but really aren't making a huge difference.
I think there's some interesting campaign themes that can come out. There's a couple of things I just want to pick up on. The first one, from your point of view, that doing social. I'm loving the idea of Alison saying, let's show them how not to do it. We need to actually, where it went wrong, videos to actually sit. But one of the, I think that we've got to tie a lot of this whole mission, if you like, for whatever it may be, back to business success for those SMEs. I spend a huge amount of time talking to them around the EBN. And whilst there is this almost a divorce, I mean, it's not 100%, but there's a divorce between the individual person acknowledging climate crisis, et cetera, and then the managing director of a 10 million turnover business saying, but. And what we've got to be able to do is to bring it back to saying, you can actually improve your business, and waste in construction might be one of them. And I think that to my mind is one thing that is an absolute must for the larger organisations. And I think the point there is that the supply chain to large corporates is the intellectual capacity of them. The corporates are behemoths that aren't, to an extent, ever going to be innovative. They rely on their supply chain to do that. And I think tying that back to improve profitability, ability to recruit better people, to be able to win new clients, because you can tell some great stories. That, to me, seems to be one of the things that's coming out. The more, if I say to them, it's good for your business, then they get that. There's one of the audience out here is Sue, who's one of our steering group, has been saying to me for many, many years that, and finally I'll listen to her, that we need a systemic change in how business operates. And I get that now. I didn't at the time. I'm looking at her now from over that point of view, and she knows that she put me in my place. But I think we do. But that part of that systemic change needs to be to convince the SME, maybe more of the M than the S, because they'll follow on from that point of view, that there is great profits to be made out of doing it differently.
Although, so but I think we have to be really careful about making this division between big companies and SMEs.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, I mean, we have clients where they're big global companies, and they have much less understanding or knowledge of this at this point in time, simply because the business they're in, it doesn't have a huge environmental kind of footprint, services business and so on. So, you know, they're just starting on the route. They're equally affected by other large companies insisting that certain commitments are made through their supply chain, because, you know, a large global services business of, say, 10,000 people is the one I'm thinking of. They serve the Fortune 500, right? So they are big in their own right, but all of their customers are big. And the reason that they are starting to think even harder about this is because they're coming under pressure in tenders for, you know, to have a plan.
Yeah.
At the same time, there are small companies who are miles ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Because, you know, perhaps they were a more purposeful sort of setup from the start, and perhaps the nature of the business they're in, or whatever it is, you know, they're miles ahead of the game. So I think you need to be really, really careful of sort of going, well, big businesses sort of know quite a lot about this already, and they can have so much influence and and somehow smaller companies, you know, don't have the same influence, or a little bit, you know, behind the curve. Not true. There are big companies that are brilliant, and some that are way behind the curve, and there are small companies that are brilliant and some that are way behind the curve.
I think tendering is key here, and what I've seen a massive change of in, you know, working in consultancy and tendering on projects is the requirement to bring in SMEs, or, you know, so I'm much more working with academia, working with like innovative small companies that have got, you know, a niche piece of technology, or, you know, so it's, and tenders are asking for it. They're also adding, say, 10% of the tender evaluation to social value.
The Environmental Business Network is here to help all businesses adapt to and benefit from the very different economic and environmental futures we all face. Subscribe to our YouTube channel or visit the website to find out more information.